Welcome back. We are about to start the fifth block of today's conference, and it's all about inclusive leadership. I'm always repeating that everyone in the organization has a role to play when it comes to shaping culture. However, leaders have a special influence and special role to play. And that's why now we'll be focusing on leadership in the workplace.
Absolutely. We'll explore this territory, so to say, starting with a discussion with Tarsha McCormick, representing WP Engine, VP Diversity, Equity and Inclusion. Hello, Tarsha.
Hello, how are you?
Hi, we're great. Surviving all the dynamic and complexity of the first day of D&I Changemakers 2022. And we've got Suneeta Shetty, HSBC Services Delivery Head of GSC Poland and Global Head of Transaction Monitoring Operations. Welcome.
Hi, thank you very much for having me.
It's great to have you both joining us. And what we really want to talk about is, of course, leadership, DEI leadership, inclusive leadership. But the main topic is understanding the expectations of DEI leadership. So when we talk about expectations and leadership in the context of DEI, what are the very first things that come to your mind? Can we start with that? Your first impressions, ideas that come to mind?
Sure. For me, what comes to mind is a leader who has curiosity, someone who really wants to seek to understand the lived experiences of their employees and people from different communities and walks of life. Taking the time to really try to understand people and not rushing to decisions, being empathetic as a leader. Taking the time to build your awareness and educate yourself, really being an ally for underrepresented communities, and looking for ways to involve all voices in the discussion. So those are the primary things that come to mind for me when I think about how to be inclusive as a leader.
Mm-hmm.
For me, the one thing I've come across in my career is the misconception that folks have on DEI, and hence their confused notions about it. You can't box up a concept like DEI and say, right, okay, you know what, this is just about sexes and nationalities or abilities. But it's what many leaders don't appreciate is that it's not just a concept, but it's actually a management style that includes all levels of diversity of thought as well. So it's a style that has to be a part of your everyday job. It's not this extra curriculum, this another new idea that you have to figure out how to implement at the side of your desk. So if it is in fact a management style, then it really needs to be sustainable. And so the thoughts that come to my mind, or the first things that come to my mind, is what's the tripod, or what are the pillars under which DEI as a leadership management style rests on? It's authentic. You've got to be authentic. It's authenticity. You cannot fake it, because then you won't be able to make it a part of your everyday management style. Then it's got to be based on logic. There's a certain degree of sensibilities you have to apply when deploying policies. They have to be very thoughtful, very mindful, very intentional. You cannot afford to be haphazard, because then you'll have some dangerous outcomes. And empathy, Tasha's right. It's got to be empathetic as well.
Well, I suppose it's fair to say that if you want trust, you'd better rely on logic, not emotions alone, depending on the field, of course. You touched on a couple of points, but when we talk about DEI leadership, I'm sure by now we all agree that it's all about leading by example here. So you cannot follow, fake it till you make it way of thinking. So it needs to feel and be authentic. Can we talk a little about trust in that context? Because trust can be seen as type of capital with essentially credibility, authenticity attached. So how do you go about it operationally to really understand within an organization that there is no way you will build a successful DEI policy operationally, also not even theoretically, but operationally, without understanding really the power of trust, which is your professional capital, isn't it? Tarsha, I think you've had like, hard to believe as it is, but you've got like over 20 years of professional experience also in the field of HR. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes, that is correct. I started when I was really young. But yes, I agree that trust is key, and the most effective leaders are ones who are able to, build trust within their teams. Trust takes time. It causes you or calls for you to be authentic as a leader. It calls for you to be vulnerable as a leader, and sometimes share more than what you may intend. But in doing that, it allows you to help build those one-on-one relationships and really get to know your team beyond just your work. And as a leader, I'm the one who sets the tone. And if I'm sharing, then my team is more open to sharing as well. And the more that I learn about you as a person, the more I can tailor my support to you, the more that I can be an inclusive leader. Now, when we think about DEI and being inclusive, the beauty of DEI is that everyone comes with their own personal, beliefs and opinions. And everyone isn't going to agree with or buy into all aspects of DEI. And I think that that's okay. But as long as organizations, make DEI a priority, they weave it into their core values and they set expectations, I'm okay with those managers and leaders meeting those expectations, even if they aren't passionate about DEI. I think DEI, being passionate is a goal state, but we know everyone isn't there, at least not yet.
Yeah, but how important is it? Because the way we understand it after a couple of conversations around this topic is that trust correlates very closely with credibility when it comes to DEI. Credibility is very close to reputation. So it's not like spending money and making money. Once lost, it's not very easily rebuilt, right? So that's very much part of your leadership role. And yes, being passionate about it may sound a little aspirational. You're lucky, because I would imagine a lot of people are simply thrown into the role. It's added to their portfolio, not something they were deliberately aiming for. Any comment?
I agree.
Yes.
It generally. Sorry, carry on, Tasha.
No, go ahead.
Suneeta.
Um, when folks are thrown into the role, like you've rightly said, it can come across as almost a disservice to DEI as a successful management style, and because folks approach it unprepared, green at the roots, and without the right degree of thought, which is absolutely critical to making DEI as a management style thoughtful and impactful. In invariably, one of the other things that takes place is you have senior leaders who come across as DEI champions, but don't necessarily demonstrate the.
Oh, we should certainly hope that Suneeta will be back with us. Tarsha, you're still there?
I am. I'm still here.
Suneeta was cut out by the brutality of the fiber optic connection. We've got two questions which sound really interesting, so maybe we can use this opportunity, Tarsha, to read it out. Tomasz, what if someone doesn't want to or is not willing to be an inclusive leader? And another one from Hans. Based on your experience, what is the best way for a company to regain the trust of its employees in DEI?
Okay. So let's start with the first question. If someone doesn't want to be an inclusive leader, was that the correction? I'm sorry, was that the question?
What if someone doesn't want to or is not willing to be an inclusive leader? One and the same thing, really.
Yeah, so again, it's a tough question, but again, the beauty of DEI is that, we all have, rights to our individual beliefs and values, and not everybody is going to agree with DEI. But as long as it's important to the company, then the company sets expectations. And if you want to continue in a leadership role, at minimum, you need to meet those expectations. And if the expectations aren't met, then I think that there is another conversation about your ability to continue in that role.
Thank you. Suneeta, would you like to comment? Because I've got like a closing question for you in a moment.
Yeah, I know I will. Thank you, and apologies for dropping off in between. So what do we do with leaders who don't want to follow the path of inclusive leadership? If that's the question, I think the honest answer to that is it really depends on seniority levels. If they're very senior folks, then the system naturally and eventually weeds them out, but only after much damage is done. The weeding out process is quite painful.
Does it?
And and it's generally on the back of failures and errors in judgments. Many times it can be long drawn out, and folks, who follow these types of incorrect leadership styles choose to silently leave or silently give in, then stay around or be vocal in their opinions. But if they're more middle management leaders, then one always has recourse to mentors, coaches, skip-level sessions, reverse feedback sessions to get the message across that, hey, listen, you are not necessarily the most inclusive of all leaders, and maybe there is some DEI-related conversations that need to be had, i.e. the stuff that Tarsha was referring to. And once that message is landed, of course, then it's possible to eventually change and become more inclusive. That's 50% of the battle done, i.e. getting the individual to recognize the gaps in their style, because not everyone's born as the best leader in the world, but it also has to do with what do we need to do to get that across. I think the first step of the battle is the hardest.
True enough, Suneeta, but we also know that in the history of management, we've also seen that some of the most notorious CEOs, colorful personalities have been the most memorable ones, which is, well, a contradiction or a paradox against what we're saying.
Yes.
So the only two questions that I'd like you to address in conclusion, because we've run out of time already, is it important to address how DEI leadership really feel about their DEI roles? And that's one thing. And the other question would be, which is the most important trait for a DEI leader out of many?
Yes, it's important. The answer to your first question. The second one is a tricky one. And I would think that the most important two traits possibly is humility and awareness of bias. And that bias could be both personal and systemic. To be a truly inclusive leader, one must constantly self-introspect on what more can be done, because DEI it's a moving target. Have we been fair and transparent enough? What more can we learn? What do we do? What do we not know? What type of critical feedback are we open to? Are we open to dissenting voices and opinions? Are we courageous enough? if as a
Exactly.
leader you consider yourself as being someone who has seen enough, who's open enough, who's accepting of difference, who's reasonable, who's humble, who's experienced, then you're not. That thought is rooted in arrogance. I've experienced leaders who cannot accept a contradicting voice, a differing opinion, feedback to their styles, but they carry labels of diversity champions, and that's
Wonderfully.
where feedback becomes career limiting.
Thank you for that wonderfully insightful response. And yet, I'm sure we all agree that there are maybe two types of humility and modesty, at least two types. One is a projection of how you want others to see you, and the other one is genuine, heartfelt, authentic humility, I'm sure.
That's it,
Tarsha?
yeah.
So I do think that it's important, but again, the beauty of people having their own beliefs. You may not agree with everything. I think we've all had to rally behind a decision or a program at work, even if we didn't fully understand it or buy into it, but we were able to make it work. And I'm going to stand on that. People don't have to be passionate about it. It does make a difference, but as long as there are expectations in place, they can be successful. When I think about the trait, I'm going to go with being curious, because curious leads you to understand people. Being curious as a leader, helps you be a better ally. It helps you be reflective, about yourself and your own biases and blind spots. And I think it ultimately leads you to be have a more visible commitment to DEI.
Fair enough, I suppose. Fortunately, is one of those contexts where the good old proverb, curiosity killed the cat, doesn't apply. So thank you very much, Tarsha. Thank you, Suneeta. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you join us. All the best.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.